So what makes the Peter Pan novel crazier than the movie? All the death and murder. Hello, comrades. So I went to a memorial service earlier today of someone who'd been struggling for a long time, going to dialysis for many years before deciding to stop. And just as my grandma had also stopped dialysis a few years earlier, and I've been thinking about death a lot, and I've been thinking about death and Peter Pan. No, not this Peter Pan, and not this Peter Pan either, although for legal reasons, this 1982 two-star classic is what I will use for most of my B-roll when talking about Peter Pan. I've been thinking about the far crazier Peter Pan, the three-star 1911 classic, actually titled Peter and Wendy, based on a play by the same author from 1904. So what makes the Peter Pan novel crazier than the movie? All the death and murder. Now, if you're familiar with the story of the girl who takes her brothers to golf with Peter Pan and a mortal child to a magical land filled with pirates and a word we no longer use for Native Americans, you may wonder who it is who gets killed. And the answer is most of the characters, actually. The book does not shy away from themes of mortality. In the very first paragraph, describing Wendy, it says, "One day when she was 2 years old, she was playing in a garden, and she plucked another flower and ran with it to her mother. I suppose she must have looked rather delightful, for Mrs. Darling put her hand to her heart and cried, 'Oh, why can't you remain like this forever?' This was all that passed between them on the subject, but henceforth Wendy knew that she must grow up. You always know after you are 2. 2 is the beginning of the end." Now that's what this book is about. 2 is the beginning of the end. For as long as you can remember, you knew something else was coming next. You knew that tomorrow was coming, and it would be different from today, just as today is different from yesterday, and you know that someday the tomorrows will end. In fact, it's one of my earliest memories, looking up at my father and asking, "Daddy, what happens when we run out of tomorrows?" And this is what it means to be human. To be human means to watch your grandparents and parents and friends and family and enemies all die, and to know that you will die too. That to live, in a sense, is also to watch your own slow death, and to understand that there is no other option. But Peter Pan rejects this. The very first line of the story is, "All children, except one, grow up." And this, of course, refers to Peter Pan, who is forever a boy, forever youthful. Although, given that J.M. Barrie was the author of Peter Pan and his brother died when he was a child, it's honestly not even 100% clear that Peter Pan is really free of death and not really the victim of it. But, on a face reading of the book, Peter Pan has gained immortality and he's far older than any human. But to earn his immortality, he does not have wisdom. Peter Pan is not a wise being in a young body. He is a perpetual child, a way far too discomforting for any of the cartoon adaptations I've seen to fully represent. When Wendy and her brothers want to fly, Peter Pan lies to them. He tells them all they have to do is think happy thoughts and fly, just because he wants to watch them fall, because it's funny to him. He knows that they need fairy dust to fly. When Wendy sews his shadow back onto him, he takes credit for the idea because he is immature and conceited. When they fly back, they fly for days without rest, and when they fall asleep, he waits until the very last moment to catch them as they are falling out of the sky, so that it will seem more impressive, because for Peter Pan, doing something in a flashier way is worth risking someone else's life. And honestly, how could it not be? What does life mean to Peter Pan? What does life mean? What could life mean to the immortal? On their way to the Neverland, it's another difference between the book and the movie. The book has it's the Neverland, not just Neverland. So on their way to the Neverland, Peter flies away from them, and upon his return, he can barely even remember them. For Peter, there is no tomorrow, there is no yesterday, there is only an endless stream of todays, there is only action, and there is never consequence for Peter. When they arrive, Tinkerbell runs ahead to the Lost Boys, the boys who as babies fell out of their strollers and followed Peter Pan on his adventures, and she tells them to shoot Wendy. That is, Tinkerbell tells them to shoot Wendy out of the sky because Tinkerbell, the tiny fairy, has a heart full of jealousy and has no qualms about committing murder. Murder to get a girl out of Peter Pan's life. And Wendy, through cartoonishly extraordinary events, lives. She she survives this ordeal and she becomes the mother to the Lost Boys. Now, this story is over a century old, so we would be missing something if we didn't take a moment to think about how gender dynamics have changed since the story was written. Wendy, a child, is seen by the other children as a mother figure, something they all seem to yearn for. They all strive, they all want that maternal love. They all want to receive it, that is. Even the pirates want to take her and make her their mother. But Wendy is never interested in the same adventures as the boy and the man boys. I'm sorry if it offends you. I know some people don't like the term man boy, but I mean, I'm gonna call the pirates man boys because that's what they are. And I think there are really two ways of interpreting Wendy's lack of interest in adventure. One is simply that women are constitutionally incapable of such adventures, and men, through their greater strength and bravery, are better equipped for such ventures. And in short, the reason that women and girls don't join the Lost Boys of Pirates is because they are inferior to the men. The second way of interpreting it is that the boys are stupid. They are risking their life and killing over nothing. And Wendy's is pushed into being an adult even though she is a child because none of the boy or man boys are capable or willing of acting like adults in that situation. They're unwilling to grow up to be adults, to be men. And there are three women in Peter's life. There's Wendy, who he views as a mother figure. There's Tinkerbell, who has a jealous obsession for Peter Pan. And there's Tiger Lily, the Native American princess they rescue from the pirates. That is, Peter Pan rescues from the pirates. All three women seem to desire a romantic relationship with Peter Pan, but for Peter Pan to develop such feelings would require maturity and growing up. Romantic love, adult love, requires you to give up things and care for another person. It is a much more equal love. But Peter Pan relegates Wendy to be a maternal figure. Yes, there is a kind of mutual love between a parent and a child, but it's not an equal love. The parent must take care of the child always, and if a young child is in a position of taking care of their parent, honestly, something has gone wrong. And really, it reminds me of that meme that when a man says that he will do anything for you, it really means that he will fight dragons for you, but not do the dishes. Peter loves novelty and adventure, but can't form any long-term stable relationship of mutual care. But I promised murder. Murder in this book, so let's get to it. After Peter Pan rescues Tiger Lily, the Lost Boys and the Native Americans form a kind of union, calling Peter the Great White Father. But the pirates almost kill all of them. There's a whole genocide of... But the pirates kill almost all of the Native Americans. It's a whole genocide of an indigenous nation. They kidnap the Lost Boys and Wendy, and they try to poison Peter Pan, but Peter Pan is saved by Tinkerbell, who drinks the poison instead, and she almost dies, but is saved because Peter Pan reaches across the Neverland to anyone who might be dreaming of the Neverland and asks them if they believe in fairies, and their belief restores her. Peter then goes on to murder almost all of the pirates. Smee gets away. Now, in the movie, Smee is kind of shown as a bumbling idiot, but I don't think he's portrayed that way particularly in the book. Captain Hook, I thought this was interesting, Captain Hook says that, Captain Hook was the only man who Barbecue feared. Probably, Barbecue being a reference to Long John Silver. But when Smee survives and Hook is dead, Smee says he's the only man who Hook ever feared, suggesting that there is a cycle of pirates that repeats, and Smee becomes the new Captain Hook, where once again a group of pirates is killed, a new group of pirates emerges with only the legends of the previous group. And it's not the only endless cycle within the book. When Wendy returns home, Peter promises to come back every spring to talk to her. And when he does come back, Tinkerbell is dead. But Peter Pan can't remember Tinkerbell, or Captain Hook for that matter, or the Lost Boys, or any of their adventures. It's interesting. One of the things that makes this such a great book is all of these images that are so wonderful and marvelous. Captain Hook and losing, Peter Pan losing his shadow, and the alligator that swallowed the ticking clock. And so much of it is so memorable, so important, so foundational in a lot of our minds, for people who grew up with the story. But Peter Pan, just a year later, he can't remember it as well as we can. And, it really struck me, Peter Pan can't even remember Tinkerbell. That's so many people's favorite part of the movie. And obviously, not only does Tinkerbell not die in the movie, but it's kind of unimaginable that Peter Pan would forget her if you just have the cartoony version of Peter Pan. And I think that there is something really, from an outside perspective, there's something really dark, there's something really gut wrenching about Peter Pan not remembering Tinkerbell or any of his previous adventures that we remember. And Peter Pan comes back again a few years later, not realizing he has missed so much time. He thinks it's spring again, but it's really a few years. And he comes back another time when Wendy is an adult, and he's heartbroken to learn that she's an adult. But he takes her daughter to be his mother because her daughter can see how much he needs a mother. And really, the cycle repeats itself, and Peter eventually takes Wendy's granddaughter, suggested that this will go on forever. Really as if running off to the Neverland is an inextricable part of humanity, part of growing up itself, which makes me wonder, what exactly is Peter Pan? He's not a character within the story, not really. He can't develop, he can't mature, he can't die. He seems more like a force of nature than a character. Within the book, running away to Neverland is seen as something that is bad. Wendy and her brothers spend weeks or maybe months in the Neverland. Her brothers even start to forget that she isn't actually their mother, and that they have another mother. They have a real mother who's sitting heartbroken at home with the window open, hoping that they will fly back in. It's really portrayed as a bad thing morally. They did a morally wrong thing to run away. And Wendy's confident that her mother will keep the window open. She will maintain hope and space for her children. But Peter says mothers aren't like that. And as we can see in Peter Pan and Kensington Gardens, another story which is kind of an origin of Peter Pan, we see that he's left as a baby still thinking he was a bird. Apparently all children used to be birds. And so he came back to his mother while she was sleeping, but decided not to stay quite yet. So he left her again, but when he returned to stay with his mother permanently, the window was closed and he'd been replaced by another child. And I think this must be kind of a horrific thought for a child. Your parents are the only people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, no matter what. Even if you are bad, you are supposed to know that they still love you. To think that they could stop loving you must be one of the scariest things a child could think. Just like disappearing is one of the worst things a child could do to a parent. So why must the children within this book disappear? Why is this an endless cycle of growing up of humanity? Or maybe it's because Peter doesn't love them. Peter sometimes struggles to understand the difference between make-believe and reality, and because of this, he's a rather abusive leader, if I'm being honest. He tells them what to eat, and sometimes he gives them real food, and sometimes he makes them pretend to eat while they starve. In fact, he knowingly does this, and if you are too skinny, he will let you eat more food, but he also strictly controls the size of the lost boys. They all have this hollowed out hole in a tree that fits them exactly, and they must all fit their hole in their own tree to make it down into their underground home. So he doesn't let you eat too much, or else you will grow too large for your hole. And perhaps he doesn't let them eat. He doesn't let the Lost Boys eat, because then they will grow up. But it's darker than that. Peter even kills them. In the book it says, quote, "The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on. And when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. But at this time, there were 6 of them, counting the twins as 2. And when he thought that one of them had killed Wendy, one of the Lost Boys had killed Wendy, he takes the arrow out from Wendy and he goes to stab the Lost Boy in the chest to murder him. And through a combination of ignorance, apathy, lack of empathy, and inability to understand reality, Peter Pan is murderous, both in terms of the negligence he inflicts on the people who follow him, and in the literal violent action he takes out on others. So why must we run from our loving mothers to spend time in terrible adventures with those who would kill us as quickly as save us? I think the answer lies in a subtle change within the book. In the beginning, the narrator talks about the Neverlands in the plural, where each one is a separate dream place for each child, and then later on we can see that they all combine together into the Netherland, which is a kind of collective unconscious shared by all humanity. And maybe it's natural that some children will dream about being a pirate and other children will dream about mermaids and being a mother. So when the children are escaping into the Neverland, they are not going into a physical place, they are escaping into a land of shared fantasy, into each other's dreams. But this isn't to dismiss it. Dreams have a reality there that is hard to grasp in the world of Peter and Wendy, in the world of this book. And I found this quote particularly striking. Mrs. Darling first heard of Peter Pan when she was tidying up her children's minds. It is the nightly custom of every good mother after her children are asleep to rummage in their minds and put things straight for next morning, repacking into their proper places the many articles that have wandered during the day. You know, it talks about her going through their passions. It talks about how their nanny, who is a dog, might have put things into their book. Honestly, there's this really weird thing with the dog. Like, the father worries about having the dog be the nanny and says, you know, like, maybe that you know, the dog thinks of them as puppies and this is bad for them in some way. And the mother's like, no, I'm sure the dog understands that they have souls. Which really strikes me, like, what does it mean for the dog to be smart enough to understand that humans have souls and that makes them different, but also not have a soul herself? But what does it mean also for your mother to go rummaging through your mind? You know, it suggests there is a physical reality within your mind that people can interact with. And there's also this question of the Lost Boys. The Lost Boys are not returned to their own mothers. Instead, they are adopted by Wendy's family. They come from this fantasy land. Like, as a physical manifestation of it, it can't just be a fantasy. So I feel like I can understand this book if I only look at Peter Pan. He seems like a dead spirit of a child hurt by the separation from his mother, but that revels in his eternal youth and eternal play. But once I get to trying to understand Wendy within the story, I feel lost. She, like all of us, runs off to a land that is fantastical, neither completely real nor fictional. But I think for a parent, they must all feel like disconnected from their child who's old enough to engage with the world, but not old enough to be their own adult. You know, I imagine it must be terrifying, like, for a Christian who believes that if someone doesn't accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, that person will be tortured for eternity. You know, imagine having that fear for your own child. Or I know there were some people who are, you know, vegans, for example, who say they would never have a child because there is a risk their child wouldn't be a vegan. And they think it's such a terrible thing, such a morally incorrect thing to eat meat. I imagine a parent must feel so distant from a child when they go through a phase of exploring the world in different ideas, and they might even grow to possess opposing ideas. Maybe that's what it means for the mother to be rummaging through their minds, that when a child grows up, the mother can't do that. The mother can't decide what they believe. They are their own person. They must make those decisions. And in this way, all children kind of run away from home a bit, spiritually at least, to a certain extent, and they bring back things and people. And thinking of my own life, I realized that my brother did something similar. There was a girl at his school who had been taken to custody, the state custody by CPS, and she needed a place to go. So my brother went to my parents with his friend and told them that my parents needed to take in that girl. They needed to offer her a home and make her, their foster daughter. And because of that, because of, what my brother did when he went out into the world and he started interacting with it, I grew up with a sister that had a very direct effect on my life. And I first decided to read this book because of something I said in my video about Catcher in the Rye. And I'll leave a link to that video if you want a more in-depth analysis, but I think people misinterpret what it means to be a catcher in the rye. I think people talk about Holden, the main character of Catcher in the Rye. They talk about him wanting to stop children from growing up as if he were Peter Pan. Peter Pan wants to stop children from growing up. But really, I think Holden wants to save children in a more literal sense. He wants to protect them from the evils and pain he has experienced, he is experiencing as a child. He sees his own friend choose to jump out a window, and he wishes he was there to catch his friend so that he might live to grow up, to save his brother, to save himself from the abuse he's experienced and the negligence he's experienced. But Peter Pan seems to offer the opposite view. Peter Pan would rather see us die than grow old, but I don't I don't know how much Peter Pan can really desire anything. At one point, Captain Hook asks him who he is, and the book says, "I am youth. I'm joy," Peter answered at a venture. "I'm a little bird that has broken out of the egg." This, of course, was nonsense, but it was proof to the unhappy Hook that Peter did not know in the least who or what he was. But I think this is indeed what Peter Pan is. Peter Pan is youth itself. It's not the youth of a baby, but that was just born, and relies on their parents for everything. It's a kind of careless learning youth that has just begun to explore the world and can't stop. And so I said I've been thinking about death, and I think part of the reason is having been at a memorial service, with someone after someone died in such a particular way to like choose to no longer receive dialysis. It's an odd feeling. It's like it's not a suicide. It's not like pulling a trigger, but it is refusing to accept the thing keeping you alive. It is the ultimate rejection of Peter Pan, I suppose. There are many stories about immoral beings that, see humans come and go and they get bored with them. For example, there's something inherently tragic about a god falling in love with a mortal, but so many gods in our stories do fall in love with mortals. And you really have to wonder how long, an immortal god could carry on the memory of a mortal they were in love with. And Peter Pan doesn't remember Tinkerbell a year later, and he seems to longer care about Wendy when she finally is a real mother. He constantly forgets everything, which I guess might be the price of immortality. With our mortal existence, our knowledge that it will end, our lives are forced into a kind of meaning. Even if you are completely nihilistic, the way you spent today is meaningful in the sense that you only have so many days, and you chose to, or were forced to spend today as you did. And I think about someone who made that kind of decision to go off of dialysis, and really a decision that whatever youth we might have in this moment is not the most important thing. Whatever life we have in this moment, might not necessarily be the most important thing, and sometime it will be our time that will arrive, and we have to accept that in a way. Sorry that was like a little heavier than normal, but if you'd like to spend a little bit of your day with me, you can click over here and we can talk about Fahrenheit 451. I also looked up quite a few words while reading Peter Pan, or Peter and Wendy, Peter Pan in Kensington, and a short story, The Blot on Peter Pan. So normally I have like a whole section where I go through all the words. But because there were so many and I don't know if everyone's interested, I made a separate community post. So you can check that out in a link below. And thank you, comrade. Have a wonderful day. But don't forget to drop me a like before you go. And remember, good night, good day, good potato.